Donald Trump shared details about upcoming negotiations with Putin. At first, the American leader puzzled all the journalists present by saying he was planning to go to Russia. Then he corrected himself, saying that the talks would actually take place in Alaska. The U.S. president stated that the meeting with the Kremlin leader would be a trial run, and that he would supposedly try to return some lost territories to Ukraine. In Trump's opinion, he will be able to determine within the first 2 minutes whether it is possible to reach an agreement with Putin or not. The politician clarified that he does not intend to make a deal between Russia and Ukraine because, to quote, "It doesn't depend on him, that Zelenskyy is most likely not going to be at the meeting in Alaska, and that he is concerned by the fact that the Ukrainian president needs constitutional approval to exchange territories." In Trump's opinion, and I quote, 88% of Ukrainians want a peace deal. The U.S. president also mentioned Moscow's wars with Napoleon and Hitler, and claimed that in 2022, the Russians could have been in Kyiv in 4 hours if they had taken the highway instead of going through the countryside.
I can just go and wish them luck, and that's it. I can say that this issue will never be resolved. There are those who believe that Putin wants all of Ukraine, and by the way, I'm one of them. But I'm going to meet with him and see how things are. And then I'll call President Zelenskyy and the European leaders right after the meeting and tell them what kind of deal might be possible. I'm not going to make this deal myself. It's not up to me to make it. Both sides have to make the deal. So I would like to see a ceasefire and the best possible deal from both sides. I've seen polls from Ukraine. 88% of people would like to see this deal happen.
A meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin doesn't make sense before the presidents of the United States and Russia meet. This opinion was expressed by none other than U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Meanwhile, there are reports that the White House is actually considering inviting the president of Ukraine to Alaska this Friday. At the same time, the U.S. is indeed working on organizing a trilateral meeting, but at a later date, Vance said in an interview with Fox News, how European and Ukrainian officials are consulting among themselves and with the Americans to have enough time to prepare for the Trump-Putin meeting. TSN's correspondent in the United States, Ol Koshelenko, has more details.
There are 4 days left until the meeting in Alaska, and there are more and more questions about what exactly will happen there, aside from the fact that Trump and Putin will have a one-on-one conversation. Last Friday, the President of the United States announced there will be an exchange of Ukrainian territories. Some of these areas will return to Kyiv's control, while others will be exchanged. And the President of Ukraine, they say, should prepare for the fact that he will have to sign something. Volodymyr Zelenskyy responded, "You shouldn't count on that. There will be no territorial gifts to the occupier." But the intrigue over what exactly Trump meant remains. The Wall Street Journal writes, the main negotiator with Putin, Steve Witkoff, played a game of broken telephone. During a group call, he told European leaders that Russia wants Ukrainian troops to completely withdraw from Donetsk and Luhansk. After that, Putin is supposedly ready to freeze the front. But when it came to the Kremlin's ambitions for Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, Witkoff completely confused his colleagues, which led some of them to think that Russia was ready to return control of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson to Ukraine. The officials whom the Trump administration briefed by phone on Wednesday and Thursday were left with opposite impressions about whether Putin intends to freeze the current front line or to completely withdraw from these regions. An American official said that Putin is calling for a halt to the war along the current front lines in both regions, and then Russia will negotiate with Ukraine about a territorial exchange, seeking Moscow's full control over Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. It's unclear what territories Ukraine would receive in return. After Zelenskyy reiterated that he would not give the occupiers anything, the idea of territorial swaps as the basis for negotiations between Trump and Putin seems irrelevant. European leaders also signed a public statement which says, national borders must not be changed by force, and the path to peace cannot be determined without Ukraine. But U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, in a Sunday interview with Fox News, continued to insist, at the meeting in Alaska, some decisions will be made that won't make either Russia or Ukraine happy, but will allow them to live in relative peace. Vance called Zelensky's participation in Friday's meeting inappropriate, despite the fact that several American media outlets, citing sources in the White House, reported that this possibility is still being considered. The vice president stated that the United States is already working on organizing trilateral talks between Trump, Zelenskyy, and Putin.
One of the most important problems is that Vladimir Putin has said he will never sit down at the negotiating table with Zelenskyy, the head of the country. And now the president has managed to change that. Right now, we are, frankly, trying to figure out the schedule for meetings and other such things, so that the three leaders could sit down and discuss ending this conflict.
As for what would guarantee lasting peace, if it is indeed established, that is not being discussed at this time. The Wall Street Journal cites a rather comical fact. Putin allegedly promised Erdogan that Russia would adopt some document in which it would pledge not to attack Ukraine or Europe again, a promise that European leaders viewed with great skepticism. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated on Sunday, Russia remains a long-term threat to them, and he advises treating the meeting between Trump and Putin as a kind of test.
On Friday, there will be a test of Putin by President Trump, and I commend him for organizing this meeting. I consider it important, and obviously, when it comes to peace negotiations, a ceasefire, and what will happen afterward. Regarding territories and security guarantees for Ukraine, Ukraine will have to be and will be involved. But on Friday, it's important to see how serious Putin is.
President Zelenskyy, in his communications with the states, is trying to walk a fine line. On the one hand, he tirelessly thanks Trump for his involvement, and on the other, he says Putin is deceiving him.
We understand the Russians' intention to try to fool America. We will not allow this. I really appreciate the determination with which President Trump is set on stopping the deaths in the war. And every day, many people are giving their lives. But the only root cause of these killings is Putin's desire to wage war and manipulate everyone he comes into contact with.
From Washington, United States, Ol Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1.
EU leaders want to speak with the US president before Trump meets with Putin in Alaska. The German agency DPA reported that this conversation could take place the day after tomorrow, on August 13th. The group call is being initiated by Chancellor Merz. Volodymyr Zelenskyy and other European leaders are expected to join the call. Europe and Ukraine have prepared their own counterproposal as a basis for peace talks with Russia. What does it include? Does it call for the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Donetsk region, and all the details of the EU's response to the upcoming summit between Russian and US leaders, where, among other things, the outlines of future peace will be discussed? Coming up next from Radio Liberty's correspondent in Brussels, Zoriana Stepanenko.
Europe is watching the upcoming summit between the US and Russian leaders, which is being prepared at an unusually rapid pace, with clear anxiety. First and foremost, because neither representatives of the EU, who would like to join such talks, nor even President Zelenskyy, have been invited so far to Alaska, where they plan to discuss Ukraine and possible scenarios for ending the war. European leaders and top officials hope that, in the end, at least the Ukrainian president will be there. Chancellor Merz, in particular, has publicly pointed out the need to invite him. He likely mentioned this to Donald Trump as well, whom he spoke with yesterday. The leaders of the most influential countries on this continent, France, Germany, Poland, the UK, Italy, Finland, as well as the President of the European Commission, have issued a joint statement emphasizing that any diplomatic solution must take into account the interests of Ukraine and Europe. Ukraine, the leaders emphasize, has the right to determine its own destiny. In their view, constructive negotiations should only take place under a ceasefire, and the current line of contact should serve as the starting point for such talks. In this way, Europe makes it clear that it is against the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region. According to reports from numerous leading Western media outlets, this is the condition Putin has set for a ceasefire.
For us, the issue of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty is not just a matter of solidarity with our neighbor, but above all, a matter of our own security. That is why, like all of you, I will be waiting for the results of the meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin. I have many concerns and many hopes.
Together with Ukraine, Europe has put forward its own counterproposal as a basis for peace negotiations with Russia. National security advisors handed it over to U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, whom they met with this weekend. According to this plan, the fighting must stop without any preconditions. Withdrawal of troops only on a mutual basis, not unilaterally by Ukraine alone. In other words, if Kyiv withdraws from some territories, then Moscow, in return, must restore control to Ukraine over other Ukrainian lands that are currently occupied. The plan from Europe and Ukraine also includes ironclad security guarantees. Among the proposals that were mentioned was, in particular, potential NATO membership, but I should note that the United States has categorically refused this to Kyiv before, both under the previous administration and the current one. The Secretary General of the alliance did not rule out that the future agreement may have to acknowledge Russia's de facto control over part of Ukraine's territory.
We have to acknowledge that Russia controls part of Ukraine's territory, and the question will be how to move forward after a ceasefire. It is possible that the future agreement will state that Russia de facto, in reality, controls part of Ukraine's territory. This should be a factual acknowledgement, not a political de jure one.
Further steps, in light of the upcoming meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States, are now being coordinated by the foreign ministers of the EU member states. Kaja Kallas has called an emergency meeting via video link. The top EU diplomat does not believe that Putin is seeking fair negotiations. She believes he is flying to Trump only to avoid new sanctions amid the growing disappointment in him from the US president. Kallas emphasizes that Europe and Ukraine must be part of any agreement between Russia and the United States. From Brussels, Zoriana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Liberty, especially for TSN 1+1.
Does any European leader have a chance to get through to Trump? And in your opinion, whose opinion is the most authoritative for the American president, besides his own, of course? Be sure to write about all this in the comments, and also make your predictions about whether there will be any fateful decisions for Ukraine this coming Friday. And of course, give us a like. Subscribe to the TSN channel on YouTube, and I'll continue with the broadcast. We still have important things ahead. It's pointless to decide Ukraine's fate without Ukraine. That's what the Ukrainian president's office is reminding everyone. In a comment to TSN, the advisor to the head of the office, Mikhailo Podolyak, stated, "Our diplomacy stands its ground, because right now, in reality, Putin doesn't want to end the war, so he's flirting with Trump to get the US to step back from resolving the conflict. All of this is to reduce support for Kyiv in terms of resources." He adds that if, during the meeting between the American and Russian presidents, the leaders of these countries consider Moscow's scenario, then it's clear that the dominant party here will not be the United States. And in any agreements regarding peace in Ukraine, Ukraine itself must, without a doubt, be involved. It is also important to take into account the position of our European partners, which is already synchronized with ours, because in this war, after all, many countries are suffering, Podolyak explains.
That is, the American side can certainly play this game, but without synchronizing positions with Ukraine, without synchronizing positions within the Triangle of Europe, where the conflict is happening, namely Eastern Europe. Without Ukraine, it is impossible to resolve the issue of war and peace.
A new tranche from the EU from the profits of frozen Russian assets. Its amount reaches about €1.5 billion. The funds will go toward payments on Ukraine's loans from the European Union. This mechanism provides non-repayable support to help Ukraine pay off the macro-financial assistance loan from the EU, as well as loans from bilateral creditors. And this is already the third such payment since the start of the full-scale invasion. The first such transfer took place in July 2024, and the second in April 2025. Russian funds were frozen in the European Union at the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Although the assets themselves remain frozen, the interest they generate is promised to be used to support Ukraine in the future as well.